Hello. This is Corinne from the North Balford Library with Lakeland Library Region, here with the third installment of our Kids Book Club, where I will be reading out loud Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. So again, keep your eye out for when I'm wearing my hat so that you know that I'm telling the story. And our background music today is from Bensound, which is royalty-free music, and this song is called Acoustic Breezes. Let's get started. Chapter 10, Anne's Apology. Marla said nothing to Matthew about the affair that evening, but when Anne proved still refractory the next morning, an explanation had to be made to account for her absence from the breakfast table. Marla told Matthew the whole story, taking pains to impress him with a due sense of the enormity of Anne's behavior. It's a good thing Anne Rachel Lynde got a calling down. She's a meddlesome gossip, was Matthew's consolatory rejoinder. Matthew Cuthbert, I'm astonished at you. You know that Anne's behavior was dreadful, and yet you take her part. I suppose you'll be saying next that she ought not be punished at all. Well, now, no, not exactly, said Matthew uneasily. I reckon she ought to be punished a little bit. But now, don't be too hard on her, Marla. Recollect, she hasn't ever had anyone to teach her right. You're gonna give her something to eat, aren't you? When did you ever hear of me starving people into good behavior? Demanded Marla indignantly. She'll have her meals regular, and I'll carry them up to her myself. But she'll stay up there until she's willing to apologize to Mrs. Lynde. And that's final, Matthew. Breakfast, dinner, and supper were very silent meals, for Anne still remained obdurate. After each meal, Marla carried a well-filled tray to the east gable and brought it down later on, not noticeably depleted. Matthew eyed its last descent with a troubled eye. Had Anne eaten anything at all? When Marla went out that evening to bring the cows up from the back pasture, Matthew, who had been hanging about the barns and watching, slipped into the house with the air of a burglar and crept upstairs. As a general thing, Matthew gravitated between the kitchen and the little bedroom off the hall where he slept. Once in a while he ventured uncomfortably into the parlor or sitting room when the minister came to tea, but he had never been upstairs in his own house since the spring he helped Marla paper the spare bedroom, and that was 4 years ago. He tiptoed along the hall and stood for several minutes outside the door of the east gable before he summoned courage to tap on it with his fingers, then opened the door to peep in. Anne was sitting on the yellow chair by the window, gazing mournfully out into the garden. Very small and unhappy she looked, and Matthew's heart smote him. He softly closed the door and tiptoed over to her. Anne, he whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. How are you making it, Anne? Anne smiled wanly. Pretty well. I suppose it's a good deal, and that helps to pass the time. Of course, it's rather lonesome, but then I might as well get used to it. Anne smiled again, bravely facing the long years of solitary imprisonment before her. Matthew recalled that he must say what he had come to say without loss of time, lest Marla return prematurely. Well, now, Anne, don't you think you'd better do it and have it over with? He whispered. It'll have to be done sooner or later, you know, for Marla's a dreadful determined woman. Dreadful determined, Anne. Do it right off, I say, and have it over with. Do you mean apologize to Mrs. Lynde? Yes, apologize. That's the word, said Matthew eagerly. Just smooth it over, so to speak. That's what I was trying to get at. I suppose I could do it to oblige you, said Anne thoughtfully. It would be true enough to say I'm sorry, because I am sorry now. I wasn't the least bit sorry last night. I was mad clear through, and I stayed mad all night. I know I did, just because I woke up 3 times, and I was just furious every time. But this morning, it was all over with. I wasn't in a temper anymore, and it left a dreadful sort of goneness, too. I felt so ashamed of myself. But I just couldn't think of going and telling Mrs. Lynde so. It would be so humiliating. I've made up my mind I'd stay shut up here forever rather than do that. But still, I'd do anything for you, if you really want me to. Well, now, of course I do. It's terrible lonesome downstairs without you. Just go and smooth it over. That's a good girl. Very well, said Anne resignedly. I'll tell Marla as soon as she comes in that I've repented. That's right, Anne. But don't tell Marla I said anything about it. She might think I was putting my oar in, and I promise not to do that. Wild horses won't drag the secret out of me, promised Anne solemnly. How would wild horses drag a secret out of a person anyhow? But Matthew was gone, scared at his own success. He fled hastily to the remotest corner of the horse pasture, lest Marla should suspect what he had been up to. Marla herself, upon her return to the house, was agreeably surprised to hear a plaintive voice calling, Marla, over the banisters. Well, she said, going into the hall. I'm sorry I've lost my temper and said rude things, and I'm willing to go and tell Mrs. Lynde so. Very well. Marla's crispness gave no sign to her relief. She had been wondering what under the canopy she should do if Anne did not give in. I'll take you down after milking. Accordingly, after milking, behold, Marla and Anne walking down the lane, the former erect and triumphant, the later drooping and dejected. But halfway down, Anne's dejection vanished as if by an enchantment. She lifted her head and stepped lightly along, her eyes fixed on the sunset sky and an air of subdued exhilaration about her. Marla beheld the change disapprovingly. This was no meek penitent, such as it behooved her to take into the presence of the offended Mrs. Lynde. What are you thinking of, Anne? She demanded sharply. I'm only imagining what I might say to Mrs. Lynde, answered Anne dreamily. This was satisfactory, or it should have been so. But Marla could not rid herself of the notion that something in her scheme of punishment was going askew. Anne had no business looking so rapt and radiant. Rapt and radiant Anne continued until they were in the very presence of Mrs. Lynde, who was sitting knitting by her kitchen window. Then the radiance vanished. Mournful penitence appeared on every feature. Before a word was spoken, Anne was suddenly down on her knees before the astonished Mrs. Rachel and held out her hands beseechingly. Oh, Mrs. Lynde, I am so extremely sorry, she said with a quiver in her voice. I could never express all my sorrow. No, not if I used up a whole dictionary. You must imagine it. I've behaved terribly to you, and I've disgraced the dear friends Marla and Matthew, who have let me stay at Green Gables, although I am not a boy. I am a dreadfully wicked and ungrateful girl, and I deserve to be punished and cast out by respectful people everywhere. It was very wicked of me to fly in a temper because you told me the truth. It was the truth. Every word you said true. My hair is red and I'm freckled and skinny and ugly. What I said to you was true too, but I shouldn't have said it. Oh, Mrs. Lynde, please, please forgive me. If you refuse, it will be a lifelong sorrow on me. You wouldn't like to inflict a lifelong sorrow on a poor little orphan girl, would you? Even if she had a dreadful temper? Oh, I'm sure you wouldn't. Mordaunt. Please say you'll forgive me, Mrs. Lynde. Anne clasped her hands together, bowed her head, and waited for the word of judgment. There was no mistaking her sincerity. It breathed in every tone of her voice. Both Marla and Mrs. Lynde recognized its unmistakable ring, but the former understood in dismay that Anne was actually enjoying her valley of humiliation, was reveling in the thoroughfulness of her abasement. Where was the wholesome punishment upon which she, Marla, had plumed herself? Anne had turned it into a species of positive pleasure. Good Mrs. Lynde, not being overburdened with perception, did not see this. She only perceived that Anne had made a very thorough apology, and all resentment vanished from her kindly, if somewhat offensive heart. There, child. Get up, she said heartily. Of course I forgive you. I guess I was a little too hard on you anyways. But I'm such an outspoken person. You mustn't mind me, that's what. It can't be denied that your hair is terrible red. But I knew a girl once, went to school with her in fact, whose hair was every mite as red as yours when she was young, but when she grew up it darkened to a real handsome auburn. I wouldn't be a mite surprised if yours did too. Not a mite. Oh, Mrs. Lynde! Anne drew a long breath as she rose to her feet. You've given me a hope. I shall always feel that you are my benefactor. Oh, I could endure anything if only I thought my hair would be a handsome auburn when I grew up. It would be so much easier to be good if one's hair was a handsome auburn, don't you think? And now may I go out into your garden and sit on that bench under the apple trees while you and Marla are talking? There is so much more scope for imagination out there. Laws, yes, girl. Run along, child. And you can pick a bouquet of them white June lilies over in the corner if you'd like. As the door closed behind Anne, Mrs. Lynde got briskly up to light a lamp. She's a real odd little thing. Take this chair, Marla. It's easier than the one you've got. I'll just keep that for the hired boy to sit on. Yes, she certainly is an odd child, but there is something kind of taken about her after all. I don't feel so surprised at you and Matthew for keeping her as I did, nor so sorry for you either. She may turn out all right. Of course, she has a queer way of expressing herself. A little too kind of forceful, you know. But she'll likely get over it now that she's come to live among civilized folk. And then, her temper's quick, I guess, but there's one comfort. A child that has a quick temper may blaze up and cool down, and never likely to be sly or deceitful. Preserve me from a sly child, that's what. On the whole, Marla, I kind of like her. When Marla went home, Anne came out of the fragrant twilight of the orchard with a sheaf of white narcissi in her hands. I apologized pretty well, didn't I? She said proudly as they went down the lane. I thought since I had to do it, I might as well do it thoroughly. You did it thoroughly, right, all enough, was Marla's comment. Marla was dismayed at finding herself inclined to laugh over the recollection. She also had an uneasy feeling that she ought to scold Anne for apologizing so well, but then that was ridiculous. She compromised on her conscience by saying severely, I hope you won't have occasion to make many more such apologies. I hope you'll try to control your temper now, Anne. That wouldn't be so hard if people didn't twit me about my looks, said Anne with a sigh. I don't get cross about other things, but I'm so tired of being twitted about my hair, and it just makes me boil over. Do you suppose my hair really will be a handsome auburn when I grow up? You shouldn't think so much about your looks, Anne. I'm afraid you're a very vain little girl. How can I be vain when I know I'm homely? Protested Anne. I love pretty things, and I hate to look in the glass and see something that isn't pretty. It makes me feel so sorrowful, just as I feel when I look at any ugly thing. I pity it because it isn't beautiful. Handsome is as handsome does, quoted Marla. I've had that said to me before, but I have my doubts about it, remarked skeptical Anne, sniffing at her narcissi. Oh, aren't these flowers sweet? It was lovely of Mrs. Lynde to give them to me. I'll have no hard feelings against Mrs. Lynde now. It gives you a lovely, comfortable feeling to apologize and be forgiven, doesn't it? Aren't the stars bright tonight? If you could live in a star, which one would you pick? I'd like that lovely, clear, big one way over there above that dark hill. Anne, do hold your tongue, said Marilla, thoroughly worn out trying to follow the rotations of Anne's thoughts. Anne said no more until they turned into their own lane. A little gypsy wind came down to meet them, laden with the spicy perfume of young, dew-wet ferns. Far up in the shadows, a cheerful light gleamed out through the trees from the kitchen at Green Gables. Anne suddenly came close to Marilla and slipped her hand into the older woman's hard palm. It's so lovely to be going home and know it's home, she said. I love Green Gables already, and I've never loved any place before. No place ever seemed like home. Oh, Marilla, I'm so happy. I could pray right now and not find it a least bit hard. Something warm and pleasant welled up in Marla's heart at touch of that sweet, thin little hand in her own. A throb of the maternity she had missed, perhaps. It was very unaccustomedness and sweetness disturbed her. She hastened to restore her sensations to their normal calm by inculcating a moral. If you'll be a good girl, you'll always be happy, Anne, and you should never find it hard to say your prayers. Saying one's prayers isn't exactly the same as praying, said Anne meditatively, but I'm going to imagine that I'm the wind that's blowing up there in those treetops. When I get tired of the trees, I'll imagine I'm gently waving down here in the ferns. Then I'll fly over to Mrs. Lynde's garden and set the flowers dancing. Then I'll go up with one great swoop over the clover field, and then I'll blow over the lake of shining waters and ripple it all up into little sparkling waves. Oh, there's so much scope for imagination in a wind. So I'll just not talk anymore, Marla. Thanks be to goodness for that, said Marla in a devout relief. Chapter 11. Anne's Impressions of Sunday School. Well, how do you like them? Said Marla. Anne was standing in the gable room, looking solemnly at 3 new dresses spread out on the bed. One was of snuffy-colored gingham, which Marla had been tempted to buy from a peddler the preceding summer because it looked so serviceable. One was a black and white checked sateen, which she had picked up at a bargain counter in the winter, and one was a stiff print of an ugly blue shade, which she had purchased that week at a Cardinal's store. She had made them up herself, and they were all made alike. Plain skirts, fulled tightly to plain waists, with sleeves as plain as waist and skirt, and tight as sleeves could be. Oh, imagine that I like them, said Anne soberly. I don't want you to imagine it, said Marla, offended. Oh, I can see you don't like the dresses. What is the matter with them? Aren't they clean and neat and new? Yes. Then why don't you like them? They're not pretty, said Anne reluctantly. Pretty? Marla sniffed. I didn't trouble my head about getting pretty dresses for you. I don't believe in pampering vanity, Anne. I'll tell you that right off. Those dresses are good, sensible, serviceable dresses without any frills or furloughs about them, and they're all you'll get this summer. The brown gingham and the blue print will do you for school when you begin to go. The sateen is for church and for Sunday school. I'll expect you to keep them neat and clean and not to tear them. I should think you'd be grateful to get most anything after those skimpy, wincy things you've been wearing. Oh, but I am grateful, protested Anne. But I'd be ever so much more gratefuler if you just made one of them with puff sleeves. puff sleeves are so fashionable now. It would give me such a thrill, Marla, to just wear a dress with puff sleeves. Well, you'll have to do without your thrill. I haven't any material to waste on puff sleeves. I think they are ridiculous looking things anyhow. I prefer the plain, sensible ones. But I'd rather look ridiculous when everyone else does than plain and sensible all by myself, persisted Anne mournfully. Trust you for that. Well, hang up those dresses carefully in your closet and then sit down and learn the Sunday school lesson. I got a quarterly from Mr. Bell for you, and you'll go to Sunday school tomorrow, said Anne, disappearing downstairs in a high dragoon. Anne clasped her hands and looked at the dresses. I did hope there would be a white one with puff sleeves, she whispered disconsolately. I prayed for one, but I didn't much expect it on that account. I didn't suppose God would have much time to bother about a little orphan girl's dress. I knew I'd just have to depend on Marla for it. Well, fortunately, I can imagine that one of them is a snow-white muslin with lovely lace frills and 3 puff sleeves. The next morning, warnings of a sick headache prevented Marla from going to Sunday school with Anne. You'll have to go down and call for Mrs. Lynn, Anne, she said. She'll see that you'll get into the right class. Now, mind you behave yourself properly. Stay to preaching afterwards and ask Mrs. Lynn to show you to our pew. Here's a cent for the collection. Don't stare at people and don't fidget. I'll expect you to tell me the text when you come home. Anne started off irreproachably, arrayed in the stiff black and white sateen, which, while decent as regards to length and certainly not open to the charge of skippiness, contrived to emphasize every corner and angle of her thin figure. Her hat was a little flat, glossy, new sailor, the extreme plainness of which had likewise much disappointed Anne, who had permitted herself secret visions of ribbons and flowers. The latter, however, were supplied before Anne reached the main road, for, being confronted halfway down the lane with a golden frenzy of wind-stirred buttercups and a glory of wild roses, Anne promptly and liberally garlanded her hat with a heavy wreath of them. Whatever other people might have thought of the result, it satisfied Anne, and she tripped gaily down the road, holding her head with its decoration of pink and yellow very proudly. When she reached Mrs. Lynde's house, she had found that the lady had gone. Nothing daunted, Anne proceeded onward to the church alone. In the porch she found a crowd of little girls, all more or less gaily attired in whites and blues and pinks, and all staring with curious eyes at this stranger in their midst, with her extraordinary head adornment. Avonlea little girls had already heard queer stories about Anne. Mrs. Lynde said that she had an awful temper. Jerry Boat, the hired boy at Green Gables, said she talked all the time to herself or to the trees and flowers like a crazy girl. They looked at her and whispered to each other behind their quarterlies. Nobody made any friendly advances. Then or later on, when the opening exercises were over, and Anne found herself in Mrs. Rogertson's class. Miss Rogertson was a middle-aged lady who had taught a Sunday school for 20 years. Her methods of teaching was to ask the printed questions from the quarterly and look sternly over its edge at the particular little girl she thought ought to answer the question. She looked very often at Anne, and Anne, thanks to Marla's drilling, answered promptly, but it may be questioned if she understood very much about either question or answer. She did not think that she liked Mrs. Rogertson, and she felt very miserable. Every other little girl in the class had puff sleeves. Anne felt life was really not worth living without puff sleeves. Well now, how did you like Sunday school? Marla wanted to know when Anne came home, her wreath having faded, and Anne had discarded it in the lane, so Marla was spared the acknowledgement of that for a time. I didn't like it one bit. It was horrid. Anne Shirley, said Marla rebukingly. Anne sat down on the rocker with a long sigh, kissed one of Bonnie's leaves, and waved her hand to a blossoming fuchsia. They might have been lonesome while I was away, she explained. And now about Sunday school. I behaved well, just as you told me. Mrs. Lynde was gone, but I went right on myself. I went into the church with a lot of other little girls, and I sat in the corner of a pew by the window while the opening exercises went on. Mr. Bell made a awful long prayer. I would have been dreadfully tired before he got through it if I hadn't been sitting by the window. But it looked right out onto the lake of shining waters, so I just gazed at that and imagined all sorts of splendid things. You shouldn't have done anything of the sort. You should have listened to Mr. Bell. But he wasn't talking to me, protested Anne. He was talking to God, and he didn't seem to be much interested in it either. I think he thought God was too far off to make it worthwhile. Then I said a little prayer myself, though. There was a long row of white birches hanging over the lake, and the sunshine fell down through them, way, way down, deep into the water. Oh, Marla, it was a beautiful dream. It gave me a thrill when I just said, thank you for it, God, 2 or 3 times. Not out loud, I hope, said Marla anxiously. Oh no, just under my breath. Well, Mr. Bell did get through it at last, and they told me to go into the classroom with Mrs. Rogerson's class. There were 9 other little girls in it. They all had puffed sleeves. I tried to imagine mine were puffed too, but I couldn't. Why couldn't I? It was just as easy as could to be to imagine they were puffed when I was alone in the east gable, but it's awfully hard there among the others who had truly puffs. You shouldn't have been thinking about your sleeves in Sunday school. You should have been attending to the lesson. I hope you know it. Oh yes, and I answered a lot of questions. Mrs. Rogerson asked ever so many. I don't think it was fair of her to do all of the asking. There was lots I wanted to ask her, but I didn't like to because I didn't think she was a kindred spirit. Then all of the other little girls recited a paraphrase. She asked me if I knew any. I told her I didn't, but I could recite The Dog at His Master's Grave if she liked. That's in the 3rd Royal Reader. It isn't really a truly religious piece of poetry, but it's so sad and melancholy that it might as well be. She said it wouldn't do, and she told me to learn the 19th paraphrase for next Sunday. I read it over in church afterwards, and it's splendid. There are 2 lines in particular that just thrill me. Quick as the slaughtered squadrons fell in Midden's evil day. I don't know what squadrons means, nor Midden either, but it sounds so tragical. I can hardly wait until next Sunday to recite it. I'll practice it all week. After Sunday school, I asked Mrs. Rogerson, because Mrs. Lynde was too far away, to show me your pew. I sat just as still as I could, and the text was Revelations, 3rd chapter, 2nd and 3rd verses. It's a very long text. If I was a minister, I'd pick the short, snappy ones. The sermon was awfully long too. I suppose the minister had to match it to the text. I didn't think he was a bit interesting. The trouble with him seems to be that he hasn't enough imagination. I didn't listen to him very much. I just let my thoughts run, and I thought of the most surprising things. Marla felt helplessly that all of this should be sternly reproved, but she was hampered by the undeniable fact that some of the things Anne had said, especially about the minister's sermons and Mr. Bell's prayers, were what she herself had really thought deep down in her heart for years, but had never given expression to. It almost seemed to her that those secret, unuttered, critical thoughts had suddenly taken visible and accusing shape in the person of this outspoken morsel of neglected humanity. Chapter 12. A Solemn Vow and Promise. It was not until the next Friday that Marla heard the story of the feather wreathed hat. She came home from Mrs. Lynde's and called Anne to account. Anne, Mrs. Rachel said you went to church last Sunday with your hat rigged out ridiculous with roses and buttercups. What on earth put you up to such a caper? A pretty-looking object you must have been. Oh, I know pink and yellow aren't becoming on me, began Anne. Becoming? Fiddlesticks! It was putting flowers on your hat at all, no matter what color they were. That was ridiculous. You are the most aggravating child. I don't see why it's any more ridiculous to wear flowers on your hat than on your dress, protested Anne. Lots of little girls there had bouquets pinned on their dresses. What was the difference? Martha was not to be drawn from the safe concrete into the dubious paths of the abstract. Don't answer back like that, Anne. It was very silly of you to do such a thing. Never let me catch you at such a trick again. Mrs. Rachel said she thought she would sink through the floor when she saw you come in all rigged out like that. She couldn't get near enough to tell you to take them off until it was too late. She said people talked about it something dreadful. Of course they would think I had no better sense than to let you go out decked like that. Oh, I'm so sorry, Anne said, tears welling in her eyes. I never thought you'd mind. The roses and buttercups are so sweet and pretty. I thought they'd look lovely on my hat. Lots of the little girls had artificial flowers on their hats. I'm afraid I'm going to be a dreadful trial to you. Maybe you better send me back to the asylum. It would be terrible. I don't think I could endure it. Most likely I would go into consumption. I'm so thin as it is, you see. But that would be better than being a trial to you. Nonsense, said Marla, vexed at herself for having made the child cry. I don't want to send you back to the asylum, I'm sure. All I want is that you should behave like other little girls and not make yourself ridiculous. Don't cry anymore. I've got some news for you. Diana Barry came home this afternoon. I'm going to go up to see if I can borrow a skirt pattern from Mrs. Barry, and if you'd like, you can come with me and get acquainted with Diana. Anne rose to her feet with clasped hands, the tears still glistening on her cheeks. The dish towel she had been hemming slipped unheeded to the floor. Oh, Marla, I'm frightened. Now that it has come, I'm actually frightened. What if she shouldn't like me? It should be the most tragical disappointment of my life. Now, don't get into a fluster. And I do wish you wouldn't use such long words. It sounds so funny in a little girl. I guess Diana'll like you well enough. It's her mother you've got to reckon with. If she doesn't like you, it won't matter how much Diana does. If she has heard about your outburst to Mrs. Lynde and going to church with buttercups around your hat, I don't know what she'll think of you. You must be polite and well-behaved and don't make any of your startling speeches. For pity's sake, if the child isn't actually trembling. Anne was trembling. Her face was pale and tense. Oh, Marla, you'd be excited too if you were going to meet a little girl you hoped to be your bosom friend and whose mother mightn't have liked you, she said as she hastened to get her hat. They went over to Orchard Slope by the shortcut across the brook and up the furry hill grove. Mrs. Barry came to the kitchen door in answer to Marla's knock. She was a tall, black-eyed, black-haired woman with a very resolute mouth. She had the reputation of being very strict with her children. How do you do, Marla? She said cordially. Come in. And this is the little girl you've adopted, I suppose? Yes, this is Anne Shirley. Spelled with an E, grasped Anne, who, tremulous and excited as she was determined there should be no misunderstanding on that important point. Miss Barry, not hearing or not comprehending, merely shook hands and said kindly, How are you? I am well in body, although considerably rumpled up in spirit. Thank you, ma'am, said Anne gravely. Then aside to Marla in an audible whisper, There wasn't anything startling in that, was there, Marla? Diana was sitting on the sofa, reading a book, which she dropped when the callers entered. She was a very pretty little girl, with her mother's black eyes and hair and rosy cheeks, and the merry expression which was her inheritance from her father. "This is my little girl, Diana," said Mrs. Barry. "Diana, you might take Anne out into the garden and show her your flowers. It'll be better for you than straining your eyes over that book. She reads entirely too much," this to Marla as the little girls went out, "and I can't prevent her, for her father aids and abets her. She's always poring over a book. I'm glad she has a prospect of a playmate. Perhaps it will take her more outdoors." Outside in the garden, which was full of mellow sunset light streaming through the dark old firs to the west of it, stood Anne and Diana, gazing bashfully at one another over a clump of glorious tiger lilies. The berry garden was a bowery wilderness of flowers which would have delighted Anne's heart at any time less fraught with destiny. It was encircled by huge old willows and tall firs, beneath which flourished flowers that loved the shade. Prim, right-angled paths, neatly bordered with clamshells, intersected it like moist red ribbons, and in the beds between old-fashioned flowers ran riot. There were rosy bleeding hearts and great splendid crimson peonies, white fragrant narcissus and thorny sweet Scotch roses, pink and blue and white columbines and lilac-tinted bouncing bets, clumps of southernwood and ribbon grass and mint, purple Adam and Eves, daffodils and masses of sweet clover with its delicate, fragrant, feathery sprays, scarlet lightning that shot its fiery lances over prim white musk flowers. A garden it was where sunshine lingered and bees hummed and winds, beguiled into loitering, purred and rustled. "Oh, Diana," said Anne at last, clasping her hands and speaking almost in a whisper, do you think you can like me a little? Enough to be my bosom friend?" Anne laughed. Diana laughed. Diana always laughed before she spoke. "Why, I guess so," she said frankly. "I'm awfully glad you've come to live at Green Gables. It'll be jolly to have somebody to play with. There isn't any other girl who lives near enough to play with, and I've no sisters big enough." "Will you swear to be my friend forever and ever?" demanded Anne eagerly. Diana looked shocked. Why, it's dreadfully wicked to swear," she said rebullantly. "Oh no, not my kind of swearing. There are two kinds, you know." I've never heard of but one kind," said Diana doubtfully. "There really is another. Oh, it isn't wicked at all. It just means vowing and promising solemnly." "Well, I don't mind doing that," agreed Diana, relieved. "How do you do it?" "We must join hands, so," said Anne gravely. "It ought to be over running water. We'll just imagine this path is running water. I'll repeat the oath first. I solemnly swear to be faithful to my bosom friend, Diana Barry, as long as the sun and moon shall endure. Now you say it and put my name in." And Diana repeated the oath with a laugh forth and aught. Then she said, "You're a queer girl, Anne. I've heard before that you were queer, but I believe I'm going to like you real well." When Marla and Anne went home, Diana went with them as far as the log bridge. The two girls walked with their arms about each other. At the brook they parted with many promises to spend the next afternoon together. "Well, did you find, Diana, a kindred spirit?" asked Marla as they went up through the garden of Green Gables. "Oh, yes," sighed Anne, blissfully unconscious of any sarcasm on Marla's part. "Oh, Marla, I'm the happiest girl on Prince Edward Island this very moment. I assure you I'll say my prayers with right good will tonight. Diana and I are going to build a playhouse in Mr. William Bell's birch grove tomorrow. Can I have those broken pieces of china that are out in the woodshed? Diana's birthday is in February and mine is in March. Don't you think it's such a strange coincidence? Diana is going to lend me a book to read. She says it's perfectly splendid and tremendously exciting. She's going to show me a place back in the woods where rice lilies grow. Don't you think Diana has got very soulful eyes? I wish I had soulful eyes. Diana is going to teach me a song called Nellie and the Hazel Dell. She's going to give me a picture to put up in my room. It's a perfectly beautiful picture, she says. A lovely lady in a pale blue silk dress. A sewing machine agent gave it to her. I wish I had something to give Diana. I'm an inch taller than Diana, but she is ever so much fatter. She says she'd like to be thin because it's so much more graceful, but I'm afraid she only said it to soothe my feelings. We're going to the shore someday to gather shells. We've agreed to call the spring down by the log bridge the Dryad's Bubble. Isn't that a perfectly elegant name? I read a story once about a spring called that. A dryad is a sort of grown-up fairy, I think. Well, all I hope is you don't talk Diana to death, said Marla. But remember this in all of your planning, Anne. You're not going to play all the time, nor most of it. You'll have your work to do, and it'll have to be done first. Anne's cup of happiness was full, and Matthew caused it to overflow. He had just gotten home from a trip to the store at Cardmelly, and he sheepishly produced a small parcel from his pocket and handed it to Anne, with a deprecating look at Marla. I heard you say you liked chocolate sweeties, so I got you some. Sniffed Marla. It'll ruin her teeth and stomach. There, child, don't look so dismal. You can eat those since Matthew has gone and got them. He'd better have brought you peppermints. They're wholesomer. Don't sicken yourself eating them all at once now. Oh, no, indeed I won't, said Anne eagerly. I'll just eat one tonight, Marla, and I can give Diana half of them, can't I? The other half will taste twice as sweet to me if I give some to her. It's delightful to think I have something to give her. I will say it for the child, said Marla when Anne had gone to her gables. She isn't stingy. I'm glad, for of all faults I detest stinginess in a child. Dear me, it's only been 3 weeks since she came, and it seems as if she's been here always. I can't imagine the place without her. Now, don't be looking I told you so, Matthew. That's bad enough in a woman, but it isn't to be endured in a man. I'm perfectly willing to own up that I'm glad I consented to keep the child, and that I'm getting fond of her. But don't you rub it in, Matthew Cuthbert. Chapter 13. The Lights of Anticipation. It's time Anne was in to do her sewing, said Marla, glancing at the clock and then out into the yellow August afternoon, where everything was drowsing in the heat. She stayed playing with Diana more than half an hour more than I gave her to leave to, and now she's perched out there on the woodpile talking to Matthew, 19 to the dozen, when she knows perfectly well that she ought to be at her work. And of course he's listening to her like a perfect ninny. I never saw such an infatuated man. The more she talks, and the odder the things she says, the more delighted he is, evidently. Anne Shirley, you come in here this minute. Do you hear me? A series of staccato taps on the west window brought Anne flying in from the yard, eyes shining, cheeks faintly flushed with pink, unbraided hair streaming behind her in a torrent of brightness. Oh, Marla! she exclaimed breathlessly. There's to be a Sunday school picnic next week in Mr. Harmon Andrews' field, right near the Lake of Shining Waters. And Mrs. Superintendent Bell and Mrs. Rachel Lynn are going to make ice cream. Think of it, Marla. Ice cream! And oh, Marla, can I go? Just look at the clock, if you please, Anne. What time did I tell you to come in? 2 o'clock. But isn't it splendid about the picnic, Marla? Please, can I go? Oh, I've never been to a picnic. I've dreamt of picnics, but I've never... Yes, I told you 2 o'clock. And it's 2:45. I'd like to know why you didn't obey me, Anne. Why, I meant to, Marla, as much as could be, but you have no idea how fascinating Idlewild is. And of course I had to tell Matthew about the picnic. Matthew is such a sympathetic listener. Please, can I go? You'll have to learn to resist the fascination of idle whatever you call it. When I tell you to come in at a certain time, I mean that time, and not half an hour later. And you needn't stop to discourse with sympathetic listeners on your way either. As for the picnic, of course you can go. You're a Sunday school scholar, and it's not likely I'd refuse to let you go when all the other little girls are going. But, faltered Anne, Diana says that everyone must take a basket of things to eat. I can't cook, as you well know, Martha, and I don't mind going to a picnic without Pup Sleep so much, but I'd feel terribly humiliated if I had to go without a basket. It's been preying on my mind ever since Diana told me. Well, it needn't prey any longer. I'll bake you a basket. Oh, you dear good Martha! Oh, you are so kind to me! Oh, I'm so much obliged to you! Getting through with her oaths, Anne cast herself into Marla's arms and rapturously kissed her sallow cheeks. It was the first time in her whole life that childish lips had voluntarily touched Marla's face. Again, that sudden sensation of startling sweetness thrilled her. She was secretly vastly pleased at Anne's impulsive caress, which is probably the reason why she said so briskly, There, never mind your kissing nonsense. I'd sooner see you doing strictly as you're told. As for cooking, I mean to be giving you lessons in that some of these days. But you're so feather-brained, Anne, I've been waiting to see if you sober down a little bit and learn to be steady before I begin. You've got to keep your wits about you in cooking, and I shall not stop in the middle of things to let your thoughts rove over all creation. Now, get out your patchwork and have your square done before tea time. I do not like patchwork, said Anne dolefully, hunting out her work basket and sitting down before a heap of red and white diamonds with a sigh. I think some kinds of sewing would be nice, but there's no scope for imagination in patchwork. It's just one little seam after another, and you never seem to be getting anywhere. But of course, I'd rather be Anne of Green Gables sewing patchwork than Anne of any other place with nothing to do but play. I wish time went as quick sewing patches as it does when I'm playing with Diana, though. Oh, we have such elegant times, Marla. I'll have to furnish most of the imagination, but I'm well able to do that. Diana is simply perfect in every other way. You know that little piece of land across the brook that runs between our farm and Mr. Barry's? It belongs to Mr. William Bell, and right in the corner there's a little ring of white birch trees. The most romantic spot, Marla! Diana and I have our playhouse there. We'll call it Idlewild. Isn't that a poetic name? I assure you it took me some time to think it out. I stayed awake nearly a whole night before I invented it. Then, just as I was dropping off to sleep, it came like an inspiration. Diana was enraptured when she heard it. We've got our house fixed up elegantly. You must come and see it, Martha. Won't you? We'll have great big stones all covered with moss for seats and boards from trees to tree for shelves. And we'll have all of our dishes on them. Of course, they're all broken, but it's the easiest thing in the world to imagine that they are whole. There's a piece of a plate with a spray of red and yellow ivy on it that's especially beautiful. We'll keep it in the parlor, and we'll have a fairy glass there, too. The fairy glass is as lovely as a dream. Martha found it out in the woods behind their chicken house. It's all full of rainbows, just little young rainbows that haven't grown big yet. And Diana's mother told her it was broken off a hanging lamp they once had. But it's nicer to imagine the fairies lost it one night when they had a ball. So we'll call it the fairy glass. Matthew was going to make a table. Oh, we had named that little round pond over in Mr. Barry's field Willowmere. I got that name out of the book Diana lent me. It was a thrilling book, Marla. The heroine had 5 lovers. I'd be satisfied with one, wouldn't you? She was very handsome, and she went through great tribulations. She could faint as easy as anything. I'd love to be able to faint, wouldn't you, Marla? It's so romantic. But I'm really getting healthy for all I'm so thin. I believe I'm getting fatter, though. Don't you think I am? I look at my elbows every morning when I get up to see if any dimples are coming. Diana is having a new dress made with elbow sleeves. She's going to wear it to the picnic. Oh, I do hope it will be fine next Wednesday. I don't feel I could endure the disappointment if anything happened to prevent me from getting to the picnic. I suppose I'd live through it, but I'm certain it would be a lifelong sorrow. It wouldn't matter if I got to 100 picnics in after years. They wouldn't make up for missing this one. They're gonna have boats on the Lake of Shining Waters. And ice cream, as I've told you. I've never tasted ice cream. Diana tried to explain what it was like, but I guess ice cream is just one of those things that are beyond imagination. And you have talked even on for 10 minutes by the clock, said Marla. Now, for curiosity's sake, see if you can hold your tongue for the same length of time. Anne held her tongue as desired, but for the rest of the week, she talked picnic and thought picnic and dreamed picnic. On Saturday it rained, and she worked herself up into such a frantic state lest it should keep on raining until and over Wednesday, that Marla made her sew an extra patchwork square on the way of steadying her nerves. On Sunday, Anne confided to Marla on the way home from church that she grew actually cold all over with excitement when the minister announced the picnic from the pulpit. Such a thrill went up and down my back, Marla. I don't think I've ever really believed until then that there was honestly going to be a picnic. I couldn't help fearing that I'd only imagined it. But when a minister says a thing in the pulpit, you just have to believe it. You set your heart too much on things, Anne, said Marla with a sigh. I'm afraid there'll be a great many disappointments in store for you throughout life. Oh, Marla, looking forward to things is half the pleasure of them, exclaimed Anne. You may not get the things themselves, but nothing can prevent you from having the fun of looking forward to them. Mrs. Lynde says, blessed are those who expect nothing, for they shall not be disappointed. But I think it would be worse to expect nothing than to be disappointed. Marla wore her amethyst brooch to church that day as usual. Marla always wore her amethyst brooch to church. She would have thought it rather sacrilegious to leave it off, as bad as forgetting her Bible or her collection dime. That amethyst brooch was Marla's most prized possession. A seafaring uncle had given it to her mother, who had in turn bequeathed it to Marla. It was an old-fashioned oval containing a braid of her mother's hair, surrounded by a border of very fine amethysts. Marla knew too little about precious stones to realize how fine the amethysts actually were, but she thought them very beautiful, and was always pleasantly conscious of their violet shimmer at her throat, above her good brown satin dress, even though she could not see it. Anne had been smitten with delighted admiration when she had first saw that brooch. Oh, Marla, it's a perfectly elegant brooch. I don't know how you can pay attention to the sermon or the prayers when you have it on. I couldn't, I know. I think amethysts are just sweet. They are what I used to think diamonds were like. Long ago, before I had ever seen a diamond, I read about them, and I tried to imagine what they would be like. I thought there would be lovely, glimmering purple stones. When I saw a real diamond in a lady's ring one day, I was so disappointed I cried. Of course, it was very lovely, but it wasn't my idea of a diamond. Would you let me hold the brooch for 1 minute, Marla? Do you think amethysts can be the souls of good violets? And that is the end of today. I hope you guys are enjoying the vocab words being put up. Again, our background music is from Bensound, which is royalty-free music, and it is called Acoustic Breezes. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and stay safe. Bye!